Hello there. So this birthing process continues, and I've been listening to a bit of information from other people. Felt like it was time to, after having had some days without doing that. And I've got my own personal story to share about this week, because we are still in this birthing process, aren't we? It continues. And I feel what I want to do today is to do what I'm doing now, which is I'm in bare feet, so I'm having a lovely grounding session, and I'm immediately confronted when I get up from the bench by this beautiful tree. It's a cherry. I don't know how we're going to get on with this wind. We'll see. And there's this magnificent pine. Pine being all about cleansing. The sea is strong today. That's the background noise I can hear beyond the seagulls and the wind. I've been out here a little while. Any excess electrical charge that I've built up over the morning through being with devices just drained right out through my feet into the earth. I'm feeling incredibly grateful to be able to do this, and now confronted by this magnificent birch. So let's just have a look at it. Birch is for quickening, for new life, new growth. And of course here we are in the spring with these young leaves coming out, looking most beautiful. And this is the tree that's drawing me most strongly of all. It might not be obvious what it is at first until I show you the ground. And the ground is covered with these leaves. And there's only one leaf that looks like this. This is a leaf from the magnolia tree. Just look how beautiful. Let's zero in on this one. So if I was an extraterrestrial just landed on Earth, and I was able to recognise this as a life form, which I'm sure I would, I could immediately become very concerned about this life form, because look, it's falling to pieces. It's got these beautiful structures on it and they're just falling off. And I could be quite concerned about that. And as I go a little further along, I could notice that a whole limb has been severed from this tree here. Look at that, this life form's lost a limb and it is losing all these components. This could appear to be very frightening. But as a being that's resident on this planet and knows my trees and knows about them, I know there's absolutely nothing to be concerned about or worried about, because actually what this tree is doing is just doing what it's meant to do. It produces these beautiful flowers. The insects pollinate the flowers and then the flowers fall off onto the ground. So this is a really bizarre introduction to what's been going on for me over the last week, because I've had an extraordinary time. First of all, I had my very first request for a universal soul retrieval. Thank you very much to the person that did ask for this. And I then went into a 3-day experience working with him on his USR. It was extraordinary for me, first of all, because it's been the first time in a long time, certainly the first time since my mother passed, that I was actually doing such a thing. And there were some particular features of the USR that were most distinctive, and one particular thing was completely unique, which I'd never seen before, which was when all the soul parts had been brought back from their various locations of being lost and imprisoned. They were all brought back to the place where they always go to, which is the lagoon with the children and the dolphins, and this is a whole separate dimension, and this is all totally normal. But then what happened is, when it was time for them to return to my client, they all formed up into the conformation of his DNA. And first of all, there was a double twisted helix of all these myriads, a mathematical number of these soul parts. But then it became even more extraordinary still, as all the other 11 helices, which are not recognized by science yet, started to materialize as well. So there were 13 helices of his DNA, and the parts that were creating this was all the soul parts that we'd recovered. So I watched them moving in this most extraordinary way. It's very hard for me to describe in real 3D terms, but it was a kinetic moving sculpture of DNA, 13 strands, and they just shot up into the cosmos and then landed into his heart. And as soon as they entered his heart center, the whole kinetic sculpture just broke off into myriad fragments, and every single fragment just went its own way to become part of his being. So that was something that I just felt so blessed to witness. Never experienced anything like it. And then within a very short space of time, having done that work, I found myself in a situation where someone became very angry with me indeed, and projected a great amount of negative energy in my direction. And that catalyzed something which was equally unexpected. And this is all going to make a great deal of sense as I go on. So what happened then is that this produced for me a triggering, and I found myself in a state of abject terror and horror, the like of which I'd not ever felt to that extent that I can consciously remember. I had this sensation on my bum which was simply unbearable, but it had to be borne because that was what was going on. And I had this sensation in my skin, especially my lower calves, which was maddening, and I had to simply stay with it. So this is really what I want to explain, as I had then went into 3 days. Interesting how the timing worked out. 3 days of working for someone else and having transcendent, beautiful experiences, followed by 3 days of such distress, emotional and physical distress, and located most especially in these parts of the body, but also a sense of discomfort and dis-ease throughout my whole body. And I just knew that exactly what I needed to do was to go with it, feel every single feeling as it arose, without judging it, without getting tracked into my rational mind, because that would only diminish the experience. What I actually needed to do was to be completely present in my emotional body. And this is what went on. So it felt like a horror, it felt like a nightmare, it felt like terror. And I was very keenly aware that this had to have something much deeper than someone merely projecting some anger towards me. There was no reason why I should have such a strong reaction to that. So something was being triggered here in a really powerful manner, and I had absolutely no idea how long it was going to go on. It simply was my experience, my reality through those 3 days. And it wasn't until I felt moved to make a phone call about a friend who I was concerned about. Basically, I was very much, I can't say I was in any fear of my present circumstances, because it wasn't really like that. I wasn't frightened about the future. It was just this overwhelming sense of horror and terror. But within all this, I had a strong feeling to contact a friend, because I was concerned. A self-employed person in the UK, self-employed people are suddenly cut off without any money if they've got their business, and they're going to have to wait 3 months before anyone's even going to consider whether or not they should actually be given some remuneration for all their lost income. So I was concerned he might be in this situation. I was wondering whether I should offer to lend him some money to tide him over or whatever. And I phoned him up, and to my delight, he's actually got more work than he had before this happened, because he's building social housing, which is regarded to be a priority. So not only is he working, he's working more, and he's got special dispensation to continue in the crisis, because this is obviously something that's very, very needed. So here I come back to the magnolias. So what happened to me is I felt such a sense of kinship with him, such a sense of connection, and I didn't talk about any of these things that I was going through. I didn't talk about any of these physical and emotional sensations at all. We simply had a casual conversation, and in so doing, I just found myself physically and emotionally calming down and calming down and calming down, until I realised that actually I was through the worst of it, and the sensations were still there, but they were weakening. They were not as strong as they were. And so that made me feel like, the wonderful sense of relief. And I have a feeling that many people have been going through their own experiences. I do feel the mainstream media is one of the primary triggers that's being employed, but experiences where they're catapulted into some kind of fear, horror, terror, whatever. And that's ultimately my message is, first of all, I would recommend to detach from the mainstream media, and second of all, feel what you're feeling, because that's what I've been doing, and I'm sure that it's the extent to which I surrendered to the feeling and fully embraced it that enabled it to pass relatively quickly in just a few days. And there are many people who won't need to go through any of these things at all. One other detail I should mention to you is that I found myself sleeping a lot longer hours than normal, like at least 10 hours, sometimes even more, and sometimes even having a sleep in a day. I knew instinctively this was part of the healing process. And so that's what happens when you're in a birthing, isn't it? Any woman who's ever given birth knows that there are times in that process which are just unspeakable, unbearable, intolerable. And yet, what does the person giving birth do? They do exactly the same as what I've done. They surrender to the experience, because ultimately that's the only choice there is. Acceptance of what is going on. And this is the great leveller, what's been going on with all of us at these times. So that's my suggestion to you. If you're going through a really challenging time, remember, nothing is as it seems, because on the surface this seems to be an absolute catastrophe. And it is, if you think about the baby in the womb about to be born. It's a catastrophe because the womb it's contracting. Well, it's never done that before. In the 9 months that baby's been in that human body, it's contracting like crazy. All these hormones are suddenly being released into its system through the placenta. It is completely disturbed from all it's ever known and experienced. It does, absolutely. For that baby in the womb being born, it feels like the end of the world, and it is. It's the end of one world, which of course leads to the beginning of the new life in the next. So my feeling is that we are coming to the end of one way of being, and it's very exciting to realise that we are moving towards a time where we are going to become more fully ourselves than we've ever been able to be before. That's the way I would put this. So in a sense, one of the things that each of us has been doing, we've been asking the question, what is it to be human? Or what is it for me to be human? I've got my own particular way of being human. It's not the same as anybody else's. So that is what we're all exploring. What is it to be human for me? So my feeling is, go with what's going on. If strong emotions arise, allow them, give them the space to be, and that's why the majority of us have been put into this lockdown situation, to enable this process to take place more clearly, more obviously, than if we were all running about doing our mainstream daily activities. And let's just take a moment to thank all the key workers who are actually keeping our society functioning, all the people working in healthcare and provision of food and essential services. Very grateful to all of you for doing what you're doing. And just as much, I'm very grateful for this azalea for giving us such a load of colour. So thank you very much, and I wish you all the best in these awakening times.